તું કોલેજમાં છે?
Yes.
हाँ सर. Sorry. हाँ सर. हाँ, કહી દઉં. Hi, if I'm not wrong, કિશોરભાઈ એવું કહે છે કે there are only 54 participants right now. Is that right? મારી પાસે અત્યારે બીજો કોઈ ઓપ્શન નથી. I don't know. ગૌરવ?
Yes, sir. They are live on YouTube. 60 watching.
Yeah, YouTube, but there are only 54, he says.
62 right now.
62. એટલે એ કહે છે કે એક જ ક્લાસ છે એમ કે that's almost like a one class, and we are actually many more people em.
Yes.
So he says કે unless until 100 120 ના થાય ત્યાં સુધી ચાલુ નથી કરવું.
Yeah.
So Prayesh, you wait till 100 120 people joins.
Okay, sir.
At least we should have strength of half of the school.
Yes, correct. Raj?
Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, so hello everyone. Good morning to everyone. I'm Juhi Faldu, 10th semester students of Hindubai Parekh School of Architecture. I'm here to host our annual function Melange. I warmly welcome all our esteemed guests present here and to each and everyone who joined us to celebrate. This year has been a lot of change in our lives. It has been a journey in itself. This Amid this, we are here to commemorate the new journey that itself is a transition. We are stepping into the 21st year of our academic journey, which is not less than a milestone. So, looking at the scenario, this year the annual function is based on theme transition. Today, we have with us architect Kishore Trivedi and architect Devang Parekh. And to add a flower in our journey, we have architect Dean De Cruz with us. Devang sir has witnessed this journey of 20 years, and it would be an honor to hear about the memorable journey from the man himself. I request Devang sir to inaugurate our festival and to share a few words with us.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juhi, for giving me opportunity to speak. On behalf of IPSA family, I welcome you all the students who have joined for this Melan, and all the faculties who have also joined. I also welcome Architect Dean De Cruz, who has taken this opportunity to be part of our inaugural function and has given us opportunity to hear his journey. I thank you. It has been a wonderful journey of 20 years. We have entered our 21st year. It is a kind of a mark, like when person becomes 21, he is entering his youth, and we are almost like a school who has entered into the youth. We had a very strong foundation which was laid in 2000 by three people: architect Kishore Trivedi, architect Kirit Bhai, and architect Yashil Vibhakar. They set up a tone for the school. They gave us a wonderful environment for us to study architecture. The curriculum was more like a visionary kind of thing, addressing the needs of the region and looking globally. We were also looking at the issues which were there at the regional level, and we were trying our best available in the region. The infrastructure was in initial years was very less, but students were very enthusiastic. They took this opportunity and tried and worked very hard to excel. And the same thing continues today. We had a great memories of our 20 years. Many people from Ahmedabad, Baroda, and other places joined in our journey to make this place a wonderful place for learning. I thank all of them to be part of our journey. It was in year 2000, 2008, I remember, that we had extended our school. The new part was added. At that time, architect Charles Korea, Professor B.V. Doshi, and architect Anant Raje, all of them came at one platform. It never happened in the history that these three stalwarts had come on one platform. It was a wonderful event that took place in the school. At that point of time, we had Professor Chaya and also Yashwant Mistry from Baroda who had come to our school. We had opportunity to interact with many international architects and architects from the country who had come as a part of the Milan festival. Anjalendra from Sri Lanka, architect from France, architect from Bangladesh, many people had come. They enjoyed our campus. They saw the work of the students and they were quite satisfied with the kind of work that is happening at the school level. All of them had always given us their piece of wisdom and we had tried to work upon it. We always strive to make our curriculum best. I told my faculties and I always tell my students, we want to make this school one of the best schools in the world. Let us work towards it. Let us have a very high goal. But we do not want to forget that we are in the Saurashtra region and we also want to learn from this region. So let's think about global, but learn from what is happening local and give the best solution. We always believed in critical thinking. We always believed that we should look upon the past, we should learn from them. We also believed in hands-on doing. So if you see the whole campus which has been developed in last 20 years and the subjects which have been included in the curriculum, they all reflect upon our vision. It is an unusual situation that happened in the last year. Because of the COVID, all this traditional notion of classroom broke down. We all went into the online mode. It never happened like this. But it gave us opportunity to see our own strength. We had to take immediate steps to set up our own infrastructure. We did it. We started the online classes. We started doing all that activities that we were doing on campus. But we took it very positively. What we saw is that we had an opportunity to interact with people all across the country, even in the juries and even otherwise. Online mode also gave us opportunity to see our strength, whether we are prepared for any worse to come, how best we can teach. These were some of the challenges which are still there with us. We are too young, a group of faculties, and we are striving to make our best out of it. We had several visiting faculties who have also contributed to IPSA, and I congratulate for making this place a best place in terms of education. This COVID situation is really a challenging situation. You people are also struggling. But in this whole struggle, we were shaken because how will we do melange? How will we do our festivals? But the final year batch took up this as an opportunity, said we will do it, we'll do it online. I remember once talking to the president and saying, why don't we do it? But I thank him that he took this opportunity and have done a wonderful job. Not only that, we could invite architect to do a lecture. We could prepare our own yearbook, which has come out wonderfully. Lot of work which has been done throughout this last year has been compiled very well. I thank this batch for doing wonderful job and welcoming the first year and showing them what we IPSA is all about. Today, on this inaugural of Melange, I want to congratulate all of them who have put up a hard work for this online event. I wish we can meet as early as possible on campus and begin our journey as normal. But with this new normal, we will have to accept a new way of living and have to go forward. I am very sure that we will be the strongest school and we shall strive for our own excellence and be the best. I wish you all the best for the Milan Festival. You know, the Milan word itself is a wonderful kind of a melody. It is about a mixture, and we are all different textures, different people coming together with the different ideas, talking to wonderful students, and we make this IPSA a very colorful IPSA. Thank you all. I wish you all the best, and we are transiting to our 21st year. Let the theme be transition, be explored, and let us learn from this theme. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll continue with this lecture. We would like Devang sir to inaugurate our yearbook.
Yeah, thank you. I will just how to turn the video.
Sir, number.
एक minute. No, I just trying my video to turn other way around. Camera. Gaurav, how do you do that? Camera change?
Camera is on, sir.
No. How do you? I want to show this in a book. No, I have joined from my laptop. Okay, I will show like this. Okay. So thank you very much for this wonderful book. It's a very good compilation, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So this is that book. Welcome, Dean.
Sir, your mic is off. We are not able to.
Okay. Sorry, I just. Never mind. It's on. It's on now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
Welcome, Dean, to our inaugural
It's 11
function. I'm
o'clock.
Devang Parekh. I'm
Hi.
principal here, and we had couple of time met at Goa because of this ZXs, and we have a common friend, Anuradha Guglani. She was
Hi.
my classmate.
I see. Okay, fine. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we all welcome Architect Dean De Cruz.
Yeah. Thank you.
He is a graduate from JJ's College of Architecture and is actively involved in professional practice as well as in academics. He has conducted numerous workshops and seminars on architecture, planning, and the environment across India as well as abroad. His works and articles has been published in leading magazines in India and abroad, supporting the Royal Art and Architecture Academy of Stockholm, Oxford Brookes University UK, and Pratt University New York for their architectural planning programs in Goa. He is a partner and principal architect in Mosaic Design Combined, a leading design firm based in Goa, involved in urban intervention, architecture, conservation, product, and graphic design. It's an honor for all of us to have you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And it's great to be here, and good to see students, young students, actually getting so excited about, people speaking. And it's important that this sort of dialogue takes place, especially at times like this when everybody's isolated and there's very little physical communication. I think it's important that we at least continue these sharing of ideas, sharing of messages, and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. So can we now begin with your presentation, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, can you share your presentation? We haven't received.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. Please.
It's coming. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. So, since your theme of this sort of event is transition, I thought I'll share my own transition. And since you'll also ask, can you share your own work? So, I'm sharing really as the starting slide, the transition of the space that we work from, right? From our first office, which we called Natural Architecture, in which I had a partnership with Dikuna. And we started off in a very Laurie Baker sort of approach to architecture. And without knowing it, we actually were doing sustainable work, in a very subtle way by being low cost. More recently, we work in a sustainable way, but in a very conscious way, looking at energy, looking at materials, looking at other issues that sustainability is defined by today in the conventional sense. So it's been quite a transition from the early days of almost 35 years ago to the present time, where we're actually looking at sustainability in a very conscious manner. So our first office, of course, was just built out a very economical, cheap, just built out of virtually waste materials. Our entrance gate was just this simple metal gate, which is made out of waste construction steel, car parts, and everything was this really pavilion-like structure, which had these Baker-like, jolly walls and China mosaic all over the place, and broken stone flooring. And it was a very intuitive architecture, and we just didn't practice as architects. We were contractors, we were builders. We actually built the buildings we designed, and that gave us tremendous amount of experience in actually understanding material, understanding cost, understanding building processes, working with laborers, working with the economics of and pushing the boundaries in terms of what we could do with it, trying to keep cost as minimum as possible. More recently, our office, of course, grew with time, and we started to take on larger projects beyond house into hospitality and other areas. And we went up to an office about 45 at one time. In the early office, it was just the two of us virtually. We do all the work, right from printing the drawings, just taking the blueprints out in the sun. We didn't have an ammonia printer even, and so it was very sort of basic, and of course we worked into a large office. We've fortunately now downsized again into something more practical as an office, and we've created space for other people to work from. So these are present offices. So going back to our early work was really about being low cost, recycling materials, but at the same time preserving the craft of the area, preserving the way people built. So we recycle all the columns, the tiles from other houses. And over the years, we've trained about 200 masons to actually build in our style. So we use a minimum of concrete. At that time, it's so just masonry materials, building arches, walls, domes, and recalling traditional systems with traditional materials. Yeah. And all these are fairly low-cost materials. I just pulled out the drawings the other day, and we're building at something like 1,000 rupees a square meter as cost construction. So it was really, and Baker, of course, used to build at much lesser cost, but even at 1,000, it was a fair challenge at that time. And all our buildings had this very basic, unique approach. We built about 50, 60 houses on our own, and but all in a very sort of Baker-like approach with using bricks, filler slab, broken stone, other waste materials, and these are fairly compact, tight, very individual, personalized sort of buildings. And over the years, we slowly shifted to an architecture which is far more open. We transitioned from an architecture which is fairly enclosed, specific, to something which had greater flexibility, something which had a greater sort of sense of openness. So these are our later houses, which are more pavilion-like, more connected to the outside, where our transition space were really verandas at times open on both sides, and a pavilion-like structure. So while initially we sort of responded to a more Goan sort of architecture, we realized that we needed to transition into something that was far more sort of responsive to the climate, and we found the Kerala architecture actually quite an inspiration. So we actually started building these giant umbrella-like structures, which were these pavilions that opened out. And so you can see these in this particular house. I mean, the kitchen, dining, living flowed, and even the bedroom, bathroom just flowed into each other. We just sort of created screen walls that actually gave the sort of privacy that one wanted in the space, but generally opened out to the garden. And since in India we have a great climate almost all year round to connect up to the outside, we can create these pavilions. In Goa, the security and privacy issues are not too much. So it's a pavilion style approach versus a sort of enclosed architecture seemed far more appropriate. And so we went on to building houses which are far more pavilion-like, daring the roofs to go out as much as they can, creating a level of transparency that almost made it non-existent. And not just in houses, but in other buildings that we did as well. So this is a cathedral that we did in Karwar. Again, creating this pavilion and this roof that actually floated above the rest of the architecture. So it came from a realization that we needed to have just a shade. We needed to just have an overall up protection for the way we whatever spaces we lived in. And this is a project, of course, we're using the same principle. It's in Bijapur, where again we're taking a pavilion-like sort of approach to things. It's a very standard grid of columns, which are actually wind towers that actually hold up a floating roofing system. They take in hot air at a high level, hydrate it. You take it into the building and cool the building space down. And not only is this pavilion-like, it's also flexible. So the whole architecture actually is modular in nature, and you can actually keep on changing the configuration of classrooms just using soundproof boards. You can make them smaller, bigger, shift spaces from here to the other, change it over the years as well. And that was the general sort of approach to the architecture, which had this sense of openness as well. So the whole thing of flexibility is something that struck us that's much needed in architecture today, rather than a permanent architecture that say has to last and hundreds of years, whatever. We need an architecture that was flexible, because architecture is getting redundant faster and faster. At times, buildings are torn down after just 20 years because they don't fit the new requirement, the new brief. So this is the building we designed for an education society in Noida. And it's a hollow column, hollow beam system, and completely dismantleable. It's all the services run through the core of the columns and beams and come up to the point that you need them. So even the air conditioning is a high velocity air conditioning system. It's just very low diameter pipes that actually run through the structure. And the floor is just stone slabs resting on neoprene pads there. So everything can be taken out or modified over time. And the idea is that it's designed in such a way that all these components are reusable. So and being a steel building, the cost of steel going up, you'll probably be able to sell the building for more than it cost you to actually build it. So here was another way of actually even approaching architecture, where in a normal conventional masonry building, when you demolish it, its value is just rubble. But in a steel building, which has this sort of flexibility and lightness and movability to it, it actually is much more tanks, cooling systems, solar pergolas, and everything plugged into things. So this was also another conscious attempt in introducing sustainability. But our real learning in sustainability came from when we were shortlisted to design the Pune Municipality Sustainability Center, which would be demonstrative of sustainability. So while designing this, we sort of consciously looked at sustainability from all ends, from in terms of energy usage, in terms of water, in terms of recycling, in terms of materials that we use, in terms of flexibility of space, and all this was put into a design in which the project was supposed to come up on the outskirts of Pune. Unfortunately, it never did. But for us, it was a great learning, and it really led us into an approach where sustainability must be a conscious effort. And how do we, look at technology? At the same time, how do we look at how people solve these things in the past, through passive systems, and how we could do it. More recently, we're actually looking at a completely off-the-grid house, which has its prefab, and we realize a great need for partnership. So we're looking at structural manufacturers, we're looking at boarding panel systems, the door and window manufacturers, electrical system suppliers, all these to plug into creating an off-the-grid, power on one side of the roof on the south and food on the other side. And natural cooling systems, flexible. It's just a 50 square meter house. It has virtually 2.5 bedrooms plugged into it. There's the things are movable in the space, very compact, very tight, and very economical as well. And this can be done as individual houses or row configurations. You can flex the internal layout as much as possible. So we're trying to push the boundary on what we can do in terms of incorporating new technology and keeping something that is really flexible, for the future. But we also look at what is the past like. So this is a project we did in Hampi, and Hampi is a tremendous inspiration of what you can take from the past. So we designed the university complex there. We created some of the master plans and some of the buildings in that complex. This is the largest building that's there. This is the library building, which is about 50,000 square feet. So we looked at the construction methods, the cooling methods of a traditional architecture, and how do we actually sort of incorporate it in something far more contemporary. So the gopurams of the first thing that stood out in the deep colonnades. So we use the gopurams, 3 gopurams in this particular case, as actually wind towers. So the 3 hollow sort of rectangles that you see at the east, west, and south corner are actually these wind towers, and they take in hot air at a high level, hydrate it, and enters the building and eventually exits through a central courtyard out of the building. And this whole building is built of stone. It's all a stone plinth, a stone colonnade, and stone roofing systems. So a little bit has the concrete thing like the chajjas in it, but we really minimize the amount of concrete we use in the building. So this gives us an opportunity to actually recall building methods in the area. So local craftspersons were employed. They cut out stone from the rock. So we minimized the actual footprint of the building, and it was a great experience to actually see such a large scale of building being actually implemented, and something which was actually done by the government, which is rare to find their consonance of supporting such an effort. They normally, when you're dealing with government agencies like the PW, they want something that's fairly conventional. So one had to actually break that sort of that they had and say, protection from the sunlight. So these colonnades actually provided that. We also got inspired by a Kerala architecture for the spa that we did for the Taj. And Kerala architecture is so simple, the way its roof form sort of covers the structure, the way it ventilates through the outside sort of articulation of the building. And so we inherited, of course, an old concrete structure for building, where we gutted the whole thing out completely. And we looked actually studied the Kerala temple, especially the snake temples, in which you see a very strong transition of space right from the outside to the inside, where, say outside you have deep sun. And as you move in, the space becomes darker, smaller, lower. And so we mimic that same thing that happened right from the outside to the inside. And you transition from one space to the other, and eventually into this hall of contemplation, which on one side had natural light coming in, on the other side had diyas mounted on it. So it was, and on the outside was the same grill work that we used for the thing, and you can see the inside with the light diyas, and the way the light actually bounced off the water body to enter the main hall of contemplation. So looking at the past, we get inspired also not just by the architecture, but by what's left after the architecture, the streets, the courtyards, the plazas. So in this particular project that we had initially called Country Courts, is now called Laguna and Juna, we actually created a negative building. We first decided what the open spaces would be like, and whatever was left over became the architecture, actually. So it's a building shaped by the sort of spaces that we wanted to create, that you walk through, where the trees were, where the pathways were, where we wanted garden pockets into it. And it was just a series of streets and courtyards that shaped the architecture eventually. This was a project that actually brought us a lot of attention. This was a hotel built right on top of the hill called Nilaya. And it was eventually one of the 100 best small hotels in the world, and it's a completely free-form building, which freed us from the norms of what an piece of architecture looked like. And it was again an architecture of an East meets West. It's an architecture which where even the couple that owned the place was, the wife was German, the husband Indian. We said, let's create an architecture where we have this merging of ethos, merging of ideologies and cultures, in a way. But at the same time, we're responsive to what the materials we used. So again, minimizing concrete. So this is a dome which is about almost 11 meters in diameter, built entirely of brick and mud mortar, and just plastered over underneath to waterproof it basically. And the flooring is situ, so it's again a work of craftspeople. So here we're able to recall craftspeople. We built this dome in just 4 days' time, very simple methods, and we realized that we've sort of left tradition and craft in the background because new materials like concrete and steel have taken over, and there are contractors to do it, and craftspeople are left to wither away in terms of what they provide to society in terms of solutions. And I think it's important that as architects we try and recall craft which is really valid today, and look at how we can use that. Our roof system over here was actually just coconut rafters. Again, how do we actually use materials that are ecologically sound? In India, unfortunately, we do not have certified forest wood, so we have to use wood which is sustainable. And the only two real woods which are sustainable are coconut and bamboo, and which are available in plenty, grow fast, can be harvested and replenished quickly. And both these last tremendously long, provided you preserve them. It can last 100 years or more, depending on how you preserve these woods. So it's important that we look at things which are ecologically have a lower footprint, and yet do something which is long-lasting. So there's only one concrete built column in the whole building, and that's the one that you see there on the right. Again, we used, that's the exposed brick dome from below, where, using materials which are easy to get, creating a craft base which can be supported. And all over India, we can see in the sort of way people build in India, that there are these traditional sort of architectural forms which are extremely sensitive to the locality. They're fairly local, and they've been part of the family. They've part of tradition of the area. It's and therefore, why do we lose it? Why do we actually get contractors and people know to build, and how do we actually allow them to do that? So in a lot of the projects we do now, especially in remote areas and in places where we're building jungle resorts, which we're doing a number of them these days, we decided to actually use local people in the whole building process. So this is the hotel just outside Bhopal, which is on a piece of farmland, at the edge of a piece of farmland. And we decided to recreate this village scene. So it's really these little courtyards which lead on to 3 or 5 rooms and eventually lead on to the other areas. This is, of course, the reception area, but responding to the simple finishes and at the same time offering a sort of contemporary look to the place. So we work right even the deep of the jungles. This is in Bandhavgarh. It's a resort for the Taj, where we built in mud. And we actually got the men of the village to build the structure and the women of the village to actually even decorate it. So you can see the things on the windows and the little details that we provided around. And we use the craft of the area. We use the the textiles, the woodwork, and everything that was available locally to actually use within the outside in the courtyards and also inside in the spaces. So we've done a number of these projects in different parts of India, Madhya Pradesh, South India, and each one sort of responding to the crafts, the local crafts of the area. At times, of course, we just respond to think of what it was. Like this is a resort in which we just done a machan, so taken from the old days when machan were actually used to shoot animals. This, of course, a machan which is meant to observe or shoot animals with a camera. And so these were just approaches of how do we actually reinterpret some traditional elements and transition them into something which is more meaningful today. So that's the inside of the machan, the upper level. And create these elevated structures where you can observe nature in different ways. So this is a resort that we've recently sort of completed, which is in Kana. Again, very pavilion-like, connecting with the jungle. So transitioning from a more, sort of basic grounded earth sort of architecture to something that's more elevated and connects to the outside. We also build a lot in sort of eco-sensitive areas, especially like coastal areas, for example. And this particular resort is in the coastal area. There was an existing building, but we couldn't add on to it with something permanent. So we had to build something temporary in terms of wood. And here we're inspired, of course, by a Japanese architecture, which is very lightweight, pavilion-like, and we did it thematically in terms of the 4 seasons, just 4 rooms of summer, winter, autumn, fall. So that's the summer, that's the winter room, and so each one is driven by the thematic need of the space in terms of the climatic region. This is a resort that is just being completed in Tadoba, another lodge, where we decided to actually elevate the whole thing off the ground. So the whole lodge actually sits above the ground on stilts, and so that it's got a great ventilation sense of space, and of course responded with the interiors in something which is meant for the sort of clientele that is in the area. So again, a lightweight architecture. It's just actually steel frame with cement boards and wooden highlighting here and there. So over the years, we've realized that we've slowly transitioned from an architecture that's fairly rooted, using lots of stone and masonry, to an architecture that's fairly lightweight. So this is for the Taj again in Sri Lanka and Bentota, and we realized that pavilion-style architecture is really the way to go. An architecture which is open, flexible, which uses natural materials and costs very little. So this is another one for the Taj in Goa. It's a restaurant which seats about 50 people, and it cost us just 9 lakhs to build. And so it's an architecture which is pavilion-like, and it actually earns about 50,000 rupees a day. So in a couple of weeks, actually, we've covered the cost of the actual building. We saw that's really a great way to go, where we're creating an architecture that's so economical that it doesn't matter if it doesn't exist for the next year. Even it's done its purpose, you can build something new. And of course, you allow for maintenance. So there's a certain engagement that you have with the building in terms of keeping it going. So we enjoy doing these pavilions. This is for the Serendipity Festival, which is held in Goa every year. And we've been doing pavilions for them. So this is a pavilion which is actually showcases the Barefoot School, which is basically a competition where young students of architecture proposed work on a craft school which could be built. And we just created a building which sort of housed those displays in it. And of course, instead of getting a contractor to build it, we decided to get the whole office together. So it's very simple bamboo structure with steel wires that actually connect up the spaces. So we look at an architecture which is fairly lightweight, flexible. So for an island resort that we designed, we needed something that was very flexible as well, because it allowed to keep that resort only 6 months of the year. So it had to be something which is dismantleable. We designed these 2 feet by 8 feet panels, which could be put together in many configurations. So you could form a room of particular type, you could change it around, make it bigger, smaller, and even configure it into the public spaces. This was the final restaurant and sort of recreational area of the resort. But it doesn't mean that an architecture is completely sort of dismantled and reassembled. It could be an architecture that also moves. So for one project, we actually created an architecture that moved. This was for actually the children of construction workers. And the children of construction workers have a very poor deal because they do not have the sort of educational, continuous educational that other school children have. So we designed a moving school so that the school actually moved with the construction workers. Every 3 months, 6 months, they're constantly moving. So we've got a permanent teacher, and the school actually moves with these people. And it just, on a tractor bed trailer, it folds up completely, and it can move around from construction site to construction site. But at times, architecture is not about building either. So we were approached by the Maharashtra Tourism Department to create a 40-room hotel in a place called Haddi, which is an extremely beautiful place. It's got a coastline of beaches, it's got islands, it's got a little village close by and a nice river backwater. And when we went there, we realized that doing a 40-room hotel would just make the villagers, bellboys and waiters and receptionists. So why don't we give tourism to the people? And it was a village of farmers and fisher folk. So we said, for the fisher folk, what do we create the floating hotels? We can actually allow each family to create a little floating pad in which they could run it as a room and float on the riverside and bring it together. And for the farmers, we actually measured all their houses and said, what if we just extend the house a little or renovate the house a little and create, homestays and collectively we, rooms. Each one was unique and where tourism actually went to the people. So where all these people were benefited from tourism because people would be staying with them. The tourists got a better deal because they'd understand the culture of the people. And it was a win-win situation because they would definitely earn a lot more than working on a hotel, and they preserved their own culture without losing it, and they became the host, so their dignity also was kept in mind, and all the money that they would otherwise have spent to sort of build a hotel went into developing to their village, into creating jetties, improving their marketplaces, putting in beach facilities, putting up their roads, and so it's a totally new approach to how do you deal with architecture, where you don't really have to build much, where you just have to create the base infrastructure and let people do the needful. So slowly we realized that we're transiting into an area which is far greater than architecture, an area which we're looking collectively at community, we're looking collectively at planning for villages. And when you look at planning nowadays, it's and planning even in the past, if you look at, say, Le Corbusier's vision of the future, and it looks quite frightening to see these giant roads with giant buildings on these central monotonous sort of causeways, and you think, oh gosh, that was from the past, and hopefully it doesn't happen today, but it has, and that's Dubai today. And we can see that it's this top-down approach to planning, which can be quite disastrous. We're creating an architecture that is inhumane, and most of these places you can hardly see pedestrians. It's everything is about the car and mobility and air-conditioned buildings and a complete isolation from the actual real world. But there is hope, and the hope lies in the vision of other people who look at how do we humanize architecture, how do we humanize planning. And this, of course, is the plan, initial plan at least, for Oroville, which is a community which was meant to be about 50,000 people. And this architecture was no doubt centered around a spiritual center. It's just little bits of it actually come up, but what's come up is actually a far more interesting informal sort of settlement that's taking place in Oroville, where it's everything experimental. They're pushing the boundaries of sustainability. But at least it's in the vision of bringing people together around a sort of spiritual center. And architects and planners all over the world have been trying to find the solution of what is the right way to go. And there have been many experiments and ideas put forward. So this is by an architect called Soon, who proposed how we look at a planning and a city which has no vehicles. And it's a very humanized economy, as he calls it, where he says that the mechanized economy, which is basically where industry is, where manufacturing is, you put at the center, and normally disastrous, because if you put the mechanized economy in the center, which is industry, we're polluting. But by actually doing that, he's put a great amount of responsibility on the mechanized economy to actually clean up the act, do things efficiently. And actually it works far more efficiently too, because whatever you produce in the mechanized economy slowly filters out into the commercial, the retail spaces surrounding it, into the infrastructure spaces surrounding it, into the offices, and in the recreational spaces, the sports, social services of hospitals, educational institutions, all that. And at the periphery is really where people stay, at the edge of fields. So in this 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer city, you'd never walk more than 500 meters. So there's absolutely no need for a vehicle. So this is the approach to. It may sound utopian, and he sort of calculated that about 16 of these 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer sort of modules of living spaces would actually provide the whole of Singapore as urbanized spaces. And the rest, which would hardly cover 10% of its land, and the rest would be fields. So 90% of the land could be just open fields which surround these cities. So that there's ideas that have been actually put into action. This is on the outskirts of Stockholm, in a place called Hammarby, and it's a city which is built on an old industrial estate site, where we've created these living modules of just 4 or 5 story buildings around central plazas, and which provide all the sort of economic sustenance that the city needs. So everyone's got their own little patch of green also in that community space, where they can grow their own vegetables. They've got spaces for interaction, for business, and informal scale, and all in a community which is, again, mostly walkable. And it's all based on what they call a closed loop system, where everything, whether it's energy, waste and water, is all recycled. So your city is sort of running in a very efficient manner. And it's actually based on an old industrial state, so you're not even destroying new land there. So about 10, 12 years ago, I was actually drawn into creating the regional plan for Goa and looking at how does Goa behave for the future? How do we plan for Goa? And the first realization was really that we needed to protect what Goa is known for. I mean, it's all its eco-sensitive zones of beach areas, of orchard areas, of fields, of forests, of agricultural lands. All these are precious to us. So we decided to create no-go zones, what we call eco-sensitive zones, where you cannot touch these areas, where it is preserved for posterity, and you allow development only in areas. And we realized that what gave these eco-sensitive zones life was actually watersheds. And watershed is a unit of development. It's where water serves the land and makes it fertile, makes it productive. And we realized we needed to map these watersheds and actually create governance systems around watersheds, rather than boundaries where the boundaries were the edge of the river or the edge of the road to one side. The river became the center of whatever village or things. And India, in fact, is a giant watershed, with the big rivers that we have, and slowly fragmenting into smaller sort of fractals of water distribution. And if we actually plan and create governance systems around watersheds, we can create this sort of a model of autonomy and the ability to control all the assets driven especially by water. That's of course the watershed of Mandovi in the area that I'm located in. And how do we actually look at these and create these little sort of sections which tell you how you can use water effectively through these different, right from the mountain areas right up to the coastal areas. So used effectively. Most often water just runs off into the sea wasted, but how can we trap it and use it productively, whether for agriculture or industry or whatever else? But the biggest realization in working on the regional plan for Goa was the fact that we needed a module. And we realized that module needed to be almost autonomous and independent. And we also realized that that module existed, and it was called the. If you look at villages traditionally all over India, they're fairly independent. They have their own water sources. They've got field areas. They've got orchard areas, settlement areas, and grazing lands, and so here was a unit of development which we could respect, which is generally varied from about 5 to 10,000 people, and take that forward. So the first thing we said is, how do we make people understand, what development was, and how do we allow them to plan? For the first time in the history of India, virtually, we gave the power to people to actually decide their future. We needed to educate them as to what planning was about, create a framework for it, and allow them to make decisions. So we said, if you're looking at development, it's about creating infrastructure. So there are two types of infrastructure. That's the grey infrastructure, which people typically know as infrastructure, which is the roads, industries, the settlement areas. There's also green infrastructure, which is really where you get your water from, where do you get your food from, where do you sequester your carbon dioxide, where do you take your waste and get it recycled by nature. All that is green infrastructure. And usually this green infrastructure in terms of areas about 5 times the area needed for grey infrastructure. And it's extremely essential. We cannot have a city without having the green space that supports it for all these needs of food and air and other resources and energy. So, of course, we looked at Google to understand the nature of the land. We did mapping of the areas. So we got the villagers to actually prepare their own maps and lay it out. So they started mapping. In this particular village, they mapped, all the animal paths, the nature trails, the big banyan trees, the water bodies, bird nesting sites, also as part of their village development plan. And they proposed, where they'd want to have, say, water harvesting taking place, where they'd like to have social forestry taking place. And they begin to map out the things of grey infrastructure and green infrastructure and realize the great need for the support system, based on the amount of food they need, based on their lifestyles, their own sort of skills, traditional skills in the area, whether it's agriculture, fisheries, whatever. And at the same time, we needed to sort of create that aspiration, something that looked exciting for the future. So how do we look at the coastal areas, creating things like water harvest for the coastal areas, to stabilize the salinity of these areas, to harvest and stabilize sand dunes. And how do we look at in the agricultural areas and the diversity that there is and create an exchange across it? How do we look at tourism integrating with this thing and taking from a concept of Southeast Asia, of agro-tripping, of allowing tourists to actually be part of the whole process of growing food and eating directly from the land? How do we look at forest areas and respecting the forest areas and allowing those connections between man and the forest areas to take place without disturbing it? And I think as architects, we need to realize that it's all about community creation. And one of my biggest heroes in this whole process has been an architect called Christopher Day, who does not work with individual clients. A lot of architects are guilty, including me, of actually working for these rich clients and building large houses. But we need architects today that actually respond to a community, where they're actually building communities through small. So Christopher does a minimum of 10 houses at a time. So he creates community and he lets them participate in the whole process of design. So getting them to and preparing, drawings and models. And so each of these houses is actually very tiny, but there's a larger common space, which has maybe a common kitchen, a common large living area. And they all share in their duties of, running families, educating their children, growing food collectively. And that's what we really need and that's really a true form of democracy in a way, of bringing people together. And there have been experiments of this in places like, Oroville, for example, of creating a democratic setup by just actually looking at how architects and planners can actually bring communities together to make a difference. So while we look at the past and look at how, we've had an architecture that's been extremely exciting, which is almost forgotten. People building in mud, sometimes up to 8 stories, as you can see in Morocco, or people building an architecture that's so flexible and movable that, in a gypsy style, just yet so climatically strong, or people creating an architecture which we would think is fairly recent and contemporary, but it's centuries old, and that's responding so well to the nature of the materials that are in the area, the climate that are in the area. And there's hope in a lot of architects. We see the work of Hassan Fatih, who's been able to draw from the past and create this very contemporary approach, and very rooted and restoring craft at the same time. Or Sonam Wanchuk, and in the schools he's done in the Ladakh area, responding again to climate and local tradition. And people like Revati Kamath also, striving in a new direction of demonstrating how we can actually build so sensibly. Or Neelam Manjunath working with bamboo and natural materials. Or even people who are not architects, like Didi Contractor, who's actually started practicing only in the age of about 50, and yet getting people inspired about how simply they could build it. So it's all about walking the talk, as architects. How do we actually demonstrate that, and how it can be done? And for that, we need to do it ourselves. And so together, we've actually created a community ourselves. We call this community Design Valley, in which we've got architects, designers, planners, graphic artists, and we brought them all together in this community, in which we were able to grow a little bit of our own food. And we have 3 main buildings there, which is the architectural office on the left, the product design office on the extreme right, and in the center is the design center, in which we actually allow for dialogue for people who are concerned about architecture, design, the environment, social issues. All this is a space where people can work from. It's a part co-working space, part presentation space, part mentoring space, and we needed to demonstrate it in the way that it should be done. So that's the permaculture land in which we grow part of our food in. Our offices are off the grid. We run completely on solar energy. Our buildings are interconnected, flow from one to the other. Some of our spaces that we have, but more than the spaces, it's all about how do we engage with the community? How do we get people? So with their constant workshops, presentations, in which, of course, this was pre-pandemic, but how do we reach out to communities? How do we share the knowledge we have? How do we get others to share their own knowledge with us? Is extremely important. So as architects, our role is not just to design buildings, it's to be an active member of society and an active participant in the growth of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure hearing from you. I would now like to open mic for all the faculties to ask questions. For those who have joined in YouTube, can comment the question, and so we can share it.
May I take this opportunity?
Sure.
To ask first? Okay, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I mean, we since my studies, I had been big fan of your kind of work, and you began with this whole idea that where you said that the idea of Bakerian kind of an way of looking architecture, and there is now that what you have transited into your own way of if I say that architecture about that Laurie Baker would be more towards a frugal kind of a way building. How do you see now? Because I find that a lot of technology and material things have changed in the way that you build right now. But the idea of the sustainability, which is a common thread between both of you, has still remained. So how do you see this change in both the ways that you have been, or how do you reflect back to the way the baker used to do and now what you have been doing right now?
So I think, what people misunderstand Baker as a person who builds in brick and filler slabs and everything. But Baker is more about innovation. So his material locally was brick. There was a traditional building in brick. We tried to minimize it. So you can still build in a Baker style using even, steel or even concrete, for example, in the minimum method. So it's really about sustainability is about innovation. And one of the main principles of sustainability is actually as low cost as possible. And how do you get it low cost? And I think we need to respond to the uniqueness of India, where we have tremendous manpower and manpower that needs to be employed. And we have to have, materials which can be used in a sustainable manner. But we also need to act ethically. So it's not sustainability is not completely black and white here. For example, in the building that I showed you in Noida, the dismantleable building, we had quite a quandary at time because we wanted a thin wall system. It was a lightweight building, so we had two choices. We had a choice of using stone, natural stone, and we had a choice of using a vitrified tile as a walling system. You get these 2 feet by 2 feet or 2 feet by 4 feet panels. And of course, the most natural choice seemed to be stone because it's a natural material. So we went, and the closest site that we could get stone from was Rajasthan. And we realized that in the quarries, the amount of pollution taking place, the amount of groundwater sort of degradation taking place, and the human rights violations that were taking place. Where people were virtually bonded labor. They couldn't get out. They were constantly in debt, and they were treated very poorly in these things. And we realized that applying the principles of sustainability or broadening the principles of sustainability to include social justice as well made us decide that we actually need to use vitrified tile, because something produced in a factory will have fair wages to the worker. They'll be taking care of pollution. They'll be to make it more efficient and cost effective. They'll be trying to reduce the energy that they have. Certain factories were trying to use waste material also in its tiles. So suddenly an industrial material actually becomes more economical and sustainable than a natural material, which you normally think is the right way to go. So we need to be constantly aware of those principles of sustainability, and not just take these green labels that manufacturers give us. No, this is a green ply, or this is a sustainable material. So how do we actually think for ourselves and apply those principles of sustainability, looking at also the other issues that I've talked about of is it right for the environment, is it right for the people who are making that material or working on it. So that's very important. So Baker style actually says that we have to apply those things. So Baker gave dignity to the people working on site. He showed them great trades. So it's important that when we apply sustainability, that it does that. So can we just look beyond the industrial efficiency of buildings and energy and water and everything to how are we supporting society? And that's important. Yeah.
Uh, Two things emerges in my mind. Is one is that because I want to understand this process of design, that what you do. Um, when you say that you are when you're designing, and there is this whole idea at back of mind that we are talking about sustainability with so many dimensions coming into mind. Uh, in this process, there are a lot of choices which you are making. At the same time, there are certain decisions which are taken based on certain idea about either environmental, social, and so on kind of thing. How do you do design? What is the process, and where do you put this full stop by saying this is enough? Now here we do not want to go beyond, or it will just go away from this idea of what we actually meant by sustainability. I want to understand this design process.
So um, when you look at sustainability, it's how you respond to. Firstly, the site. How do you respond to the client's brief, and how do you minimize what's happening to the site, and how do you challenge the brief? I think is extremely important. A lot of times, briefs come to you with very little thought. The client just says, "Okay, I want this thing." So whether it's a house or whether it's an institutional project, so I think it's important that you actually handhold people and you say that start with zero. Do we need it in the first place? So I remember there's this priest who came to us and said, I have this chapel. It's very small. The population of the village has doubled, and I need to break it down, and I want to build a new, larger chapel or church. And so I went over there, and it's a really pretty building. And I said, why do you want to do this? So, why don't you have two masses? You have one mass for one part of the village, and another mass for the other part of the village. And he said, oh yeah, it's a good idea. So it is non-architectural at all. So how do you actually innovate and say that do I need to build in the first place? And if I do build, how do I minimize it? How do I keep it flexible? Can it be used? In fact, now in say UK, for example, when they have this PPP model, private partnership buildings, they say that the building should serve three purposes at least. So for the school building they're doing, they say can it be used by the local community? For the elderly, a senior citizen, can be used as a gym for some other people. So it has to be multi-purpose, and that's the only way we can create efficiency and really think about. And we look at the past. All these models have been there. It's just that today we're so fixed in our typology sets that this is a house, this is an office, and we realize today with the pandemic that our house can be an office as well. So it doesn't make much of a difference. And we're able to flex so much, and so I think there's a great learning from the fact that we aren't flexible. Why do we get into this very rigid sort of definition of spaces and typologies and everything when we can actually create this flexibility? But yes, we do need to cater for it, and to some extent to consciously make them flexible. And I think sustainability is, as I mentioned earlier, is all about how do we keep the costs down. I think that's the first thing you apply on the thing. I know as architects, a lot of our fees are based on percentages, and people think that they're always suspecting us, jacking up the price so that we can get more fees. But so it's important that we sort of say that this is our real role, and to create a solution which is not necessarily architectural, create a solution which is long term. Or times even short term. So we're looking at the temporary structures. How do we actually say that we only need it for this period of time? So why not? Let it be a building which you can dismantle, or it slowly withers into nature. So I think those are the innovations that we need to. That will definitely bring about a correct approach to sustainability, and not the sort of LEED rated or TERI rated sustainability, sort of formats that we have today, where we're actually using our own innovation. We're using our own thinking ability and deciding, this works and this doesn't.
Yeah, I leave it to other person. Then we can come back to Hitesh.
Hi, Dean. Hitesh Changelaya. I teach at the school. We met a few times, but you might not remember. That was in 97, 98. I was with Gerard for a time.
I see. Okay.
Okay. What I want to ask is, looking at your work, it feels there is a significant role of craftsman and the craft practices which we have. And if it's carefully, some of those practices are not in mainstream today.
Yeah.
Can you articulate your working with craftsmen and the kind of role they play in the practice you do?
So not all our work is necessarily crafts, people based. Our early work was craft people, or the jungle work, large work is crafts people. So I think it's when we're looking at crafts people, it's how do we engage, local community in the process. So in Goa, for example, we build in laterite. Laterite's a local stone, and it's just hewn out of the ground. So can we use that stone locally? It supports the local community. In fact, every village in Goa actually had a laterite quarry. All the houses were built out of those laterite quarries. So how do we sort of minimize that, rather than say using brickwork, which usually needs wood for firing, and you're using topsoil. So you set those parameters and say, okay, fine, this is a national material that's easily available and can be use that, and maybe there's a craft people involved. And over the years, we've trained people to actually work with that stone. It's a soft enough stone to carve, to shape into arches, to get a lot of detailed corbels out, columns, everything in that. So you're creating a craft base, and they've almost honed it to a perfection now. The sort of level which you can sort of sculpt laterite is really amazing that we see. And there are people working. So sometimes we even use like a more more conventional and new material like steel. But over the years, I mean, we've seen metal smiths create some wonderful, design, just using metal in the thing. So it doesn't necessarily that it has to be an old material like wood, for example. So can it be a new traditional material, and can we give them the freedom to actually use this innovatively? So I think when we talk about craft, I mean, we couldn't imagine somebody sitting in a village hut and doing something very basic. So craft is about how do you create sort of a skill base in which you're also creating livelihoods, local livelihoods, where you're not part of a bigger system. Because the unfortunate part in today, I know I may sound like one of these socialists, but is really large corporate houses where everyone is dumped down into a particular way of working. Factories, make something. You're just one little cog. You're somebody's hammering something, somebody's welding something, whatever. But if you have this thing where you actually are part of the whole building process, you say, I built that, and that's part of the sort of pride of their work, and you'll find a much greater quality of execution. You find people actually connecting with them. And I've worked with masons and carpenters and everything, and they're all extremely proud that I've actually did this part of the house, or I actually did. So that connection is invaluable, and I think that's important that people have that connection. And for centuries, we never had architects. People, they were just master craft people who built themselves, and we've lost that tradition. So that's why I mentioned people like Revati Kamath and Ela Manjunath and all, because they're trying to get back. And I see a lot of younger architects actually even doing that. They're so disillusioned with conventional architecture that they want to get their hands on something, build with their hands. And I think it's important that we encourage them, even as mentors and educationists, that we let students of architecture get that experience. So some may, of course, prefer we just be on the drawing board, but there's some people who actually want to see that taking place. And especially today, when we need to serve a much greater community, and not just the urban centric areas that we serve at the moment and just the rich. There's a large part of society that needs to be re-empowered. And I remember what happened in Croatia. So after the war in Croatia, I mean, a lot of the cities were left in ruin, and they didn't know how to rebuild it, because to rebuild it would take a lot of money. So the UN actually, bought sand, cement, brick, stone, other steel materials, and kept it the corner of roads where buildings had been damaged by the war. And they trained people to actually build and construct. So families actually rebuilt their whole homes, and all those pieces of cement and stone and whatever building materials, nobody would rob, because you could find more the next street corner. So it was people learned to build and rebuild their cities, and they built them much better than any contractor would do that at much less of a cost. So that's the way to go forward. How do we re-empower people into building and create a new craft base? I think that's what we need to look at. So we, as architects, are facilitators of that thing. We don't have to do it ourselves. We should be people who know the building craft, who know what's good in terms of design, and then let people get re-empowered. And we can see a tremendous change that will take place in our country, if we allow that.
I have one more question to in a similar line. You mentioned about cost of construction specifically, and low cost building practices in a greater extent leads to a building practice which is sustainable, which consumes less energy, because the energy converts itself into a cost. But if you see urban architecture today, the kind of real estate practice we have, the construction cost is a very small segment of the overall building economics. So somehow, many a time I feel that the idea of low cost construction itself becomes absolute, because people do not really care about cost of construction, because the land or the property have a much greater stake as far as the cost is concerned. So I just wanted to have your view. How you see this process in contemporary context?
So I would think, that's why I brought up the case of Christopher Day, where, you by actually clubbing things together, you could actually bring costs down. So the cost of construction of something like whatever he designs is probably, close to half of what a normal conventional cost of construction is. And we've seen that happening in India as well. We look at, say, even Bombay, in the Shivaji Park area, for example. All that is actually
it's 12 o'clock.
An architecture that is built by collaboration. It was what they call this, where people, got together, 10, 12 people built a building themselves, and they'd save a lot of money. And it's only when that thing collapsed that actually developers came into Bombay, where they started building these larger complexes. So this collective way of actually going about building is extremely economical, and you're actually getting exactly what you want. In a developer-based sort of approach, you have to take what you get in terms of 1 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, this thing, that. Whereas in something where you're collectively doing something, you can get exactly what you want. And a lot of them are usually, these communities actually have a skilled person in it. Or there's somebody who's say doing somebody who's good at working out the economics for it. And these sort of approaches are really lead to an architecture which is built together and far more effective in its design. So I think it's all about bringing people together to actually do this. And unfortunately, in India, we've lost that community effort in construction. And I think we need to look at Kerala, for example, actually has trained women masons there, and it's extremely effective. Honashala in the north, they've done a tremendous amount in actually skilling people and actually getting them to build themselves. And so it's, when you talk about cost, because I think what you spoke about is more like an urban-centric thing, where your land values are extremely high, and therefore people are looking at, that the cost of the building is negligible compared to the cost of the land, which is true, certainly. But we also look at how we actually reduce that. So places like Japan and even parts of Europe actually solve that by creating sort of living spaces which are smaller. So if you look at some of the European countries, a lot of the housing is really tiny, but it's built above a mall where you have collective living. So people have their food and other sources, the recreational sources just below that. And their apartments are these tiny little almost studio things where the whole family can stay in. So that's the way to go, possibly, where we actually go down to a micro level. So we save on, the footprint of the building and work in that way.
Thank you, Dean, for your response. I worked with Hunashala when it formulated in 2001.
Yeah.
And so 2001 to 2004, I was working with them. And this question came in a backdrop of the kind of work which we did then there.
Yeah.
But very nice to see you after almost 20 years.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Thanks.
So we have a few questions from students. I'm pasting here in chat.
You will have to read that question.
Yeah, just read it, because it comes on very fast and disappears. Yeah.
You might have to open the chat box.
Okay, one that I could make was, how do you get people to transit from urban materials to other sustainable materials? Yeah. So from what I quickly glanced at, so I think from urban materials, it's it's area specific, of course. So if in an urban area, yes, we try to use materials which are fairly, sort of thinner, lightweight, easy construction. Unfortunately, most urban areas where our development is controlled by developers. I mean, basically people who just get ready-made apartments. There's very little that individual clients can actually, build in these areas due to the high cost of land and other issues of, development permissions. And so it's in an urban scenario, we can still, challenge the way we build by saying that we need something that's more flexible. And people are now looking at, as I mentioned earlier, these micro living ways of going about things. So I remember this when we had one of the events over here, I think it was peripheral to the Z-axis thing. There was one problem that was given of living in the city for a bachelor, and how does a bachelor live in the city without having a place to stay? So can we actually flex public spaces? Can we say, flex offices to become dormitories at night? How do we allow them today to wash their clothes? Where do they eat? And some really innovative ideas came up from young students of architecture and even young architects of how do people live in a city where the city offers very little. And we can see how poorly people live because, a lot of people still living on the street. And so those are solutions that, as architects, we need to really, look at it. So while it's important, yes, look at, the middle class and the upper middle class as, design solutions. I think we miss the point of, the section of society that we don't see. And that's important. So if we're able to solve the bottommost rung of society, I think the rest will be a lot easier. So I think I remember there's, and it can be by very innovative solutions. There was a mattress company in Karachi that actually wanted to advertise their mattresses. And they said, how can we do it in a social manner? So they actually did this sort of mattress hoarding, which was on two poles, which swung around. So daytime, it was kept vertical with a little hoarding, say, buy so-and-so mattress, whatever. And at nighttime, it could flip over, and people could actually sleep on that mattress. So street dwellers would actually sleep on the footpath, got a chance to actually sleep off the ground on the mattress. And it was a fantastic, goodwill gesture and a fantastic ad, because here was this company, through its CSR, was actually addressing the street dwellers, which had very raw deal in life, and here was giving them at least something comfortable, off all the creatures that live on the ground, to live on something that's elevated and safer and more comfortable to live on. So that's a very tiny. In fact, even in one of the design sort of things in India, there was this thing of one entry was for students of architecture, where it was something where it's vertical hoarding. And this vertical hoarding could actually pull off the wall, compound wall, and come down and cover people at night, so you don't get rain, or it sort of protects them from other creatures. So it's a hoarding during the day, and it comes over the footpath at night and gives them some basic protection. So there are ways in which we can actually look at these basic solutions. So, while the conventional thing of catering to the upper section society is important, if we as students of architecture, students of architecture can actually look at these, basic approaches first, I think would be a great start in getting innovation going. Okay, so from what I read, it's about traditional architecture. So as I showed in some of the projects, with like say the Humpy project, traditional architecture. So it's really about materials and form and climatic response, to what's been done traditionally. So how do those materials perform in the past? What is the need today? Can they be incorporated? So, for example, in Hampi, the granite stone is actually extremely cheap. It's just taken out from the ground. It's extremely strong. It has its limitations, of course, so it cannot do large spans. So it needs to be a hybrid approach as well. So you use these traditional materials in the most practical way. You do not take granite stone and make a giant beam out of it, because that's not the right thing. So if you need a large space, yes, you would use a material which has greater technology, like steel, for example, to create, say, a large span. So it's all about being sensible about what you use. So you use things appropriately and where it can be used, and you use things innovatively where it's needed. So it's all about being flexible, being innovative, and it all varies actually from project to project as well.
Your views on Indian Smart City Mission? One of the students have asked.
Okay. Oh, that's a controversial topic, I must say. So I can share with you what's happened to the smart city. Like Panjim, the capital of Goa, was also declared a smart city, and so one of the parameters of thing was actually dealing with the poor. So the first thing, they couldn't find poor people in Panjim, so so that aspect went out. Then eventually it just turned out that it to do up small areas of paving something over here and doing something over there. But I think it's, if you're looking at smart cities, it's, you need to get the basics first right. So it's sometimes is how do you actually create community. There's an organization in Australia which is called Village Well, and Village Well has nothing to do with wells or even a village. It's all about actually how do you make communities well. So village is taken as a community, and well is taken as well-being. And so Village Well actually works on small-scale urban interventions within a city. So if you're looking at, say, they're designing a space where there's a shopping center, whatever, and generally in shopping centers or malls, there's no place to sit. I mean, you find there's no bench, and so here they purposely put seats. They put things which could encourage conversation, a children's play area, whatever, where families can actually get together, pause for a little moment, and start conversing. When they design bus stops, they don't do straight bus stops, they do curved bus stops. So the seating is actually curved, so people have more eye contact with each other, and they believe that conversation would start from that thing. The moment you look at somebody over there, if you're looking straight at the road, you won't converse. But if you're looking at each other, you start starting some level of conversation. You talk about how are you, and what's going on, and through that dialogue of making people meet and converse, is you can bring about social change, because people start talking about things they like, they don't like, whether it's something is wrong with the civic system, the political system, the educational system. They start conversing about it, and they form a force which can then bring about change. Because the problem is that we are so isolated. The only thing we connect is on a Facebook or WhatsApp, whatever, and nothing much comes of it, because it's all about people sending messages and nobody takes action. But taking a sort of advantage of physical people physically interacting, you can find people who actually now say, okay, we want this. And we found that when we did the regional plan, that when people are empowered or people are engaged in saying that I want this, when they're making the plan, they form these development committees that go around the village and walk and decide on things, and that immediately sort of ensures that, say, even the political system, which sometimes hijacks people, they get elected and they do what they want to at the end of it, or the civic system is not doing its duty, or education needs to be revamped. So in that case, parents takes charge, or the community takes charge, and say that and by the simple discussion of they can actually form a force. And architecture plays a big role in actually creating spaces that are conducive to dialogue. So that's why in our own offices, having this design center over there is a place for dialogue, where people can actually meet, discuss, and take ideas forward. So we just act as a platform. We just need somebody to empower people to actually take action on their own. We started an initiative called Act for Goa, which is basically through an app, people can actually map all the issues that we have in Goa, so whether it's the garbage problem, water problem, transport problem, somebody's filling the field, all that can be sent to the government. So it collaborates with the government, saying that this is what people need. They do not need one fancy fountain in the middle of the crossroads or something. What they need is a good footpath. What they need is the garbage to be collected at so and so time. So this empowers people. So rather than put a thing which takes complaints and everything, we make people actually file those things themselves and take action and monitor that it happens. So I think empowering people through architecture, through design, is extremely important in bringing about any level of change.
Riddhi, you wanted to ask?
Yeah, good afternoon. Sorry, my video is not working, but I would like to pose a question. Good afternoon, Dean.
Yeah.
And I'm Riddhi Shah, and I teach in IPSA since 2011.
Okay.
So my question is specifically with the premise that that we have that there's a distinct division between academia and practice. So this is the premise. My question is that what do you think are a few things which academia must continue, and what are the few things which academia must include in its curriculum so that this division becomes less?
So I agree with you that academia needs a constant reality check, because at times we teach what we've been taught 30 years earlier, and so it's we find the same curriculum, same
Yeah.
and so we need to sort of challenge that in a way. And fortunately, university sort of set guidelines don't allow individual colleges to change that much. But even with that, you can flex it. It's I mean, the exams are one thing which you have to fulfill this sort of this is the sort of studies that you do, and these are sort of things that you're expected to know. But I think it's if we can actually understand what's happening in the world, and as somebody who's both been in practice and in academics, I can see the general standards of education actually go down. And I don't blame the students. I don't even blame the teachers. It's really a disconnect that we have with the issues that we're facing today. So it's with the challenges that we're facing in the country, in terms of, say, in the environment, in the social sector, in even the economic sector. And so how do we actually get students to sort of look at these issues and work out innovative problems to it. So a lot of the time when students come fresh to us as either as trainees or as young architects, I can sense the disconnect of the real world. And a lot of it is to do with the fact that they've been trained very specifically as architects. And I think as a course of architecture, we actually, its potential to be to give us this holistic education must be tapped. The subjects we study are so broad-based that they're completely vast. So each student actually has different assets, talents, and interests. So I think we need to look at students as individuals, and can we actually see what student is good at something? Is there somebody who's really keen on, say, an environmental aspect of things, the social aspect of things, the technology aspect of things, and can we, through electives, let those sort of areas of concern flourish in some way? That would be one way of actually going about it, where we're tapping their talent, because otherwise they come out all evenly sort of educated in their fifth year, and then they're thrust into the real world, and then they struggle to actually find their own sort of qualities and assets and abilities. So we can tap that early on. Yes, for the first 3 years, I think, they need definitely an even sort of thing where they're supported in their skill-based development. But further on, I think is to recognize the individuality and to ensure that they're supported in those particular areas. And also for colleges, I mean, though some colleges say that, you can almost boldly say that we are creating architects for the market. And which is a sad thing today, because the market is also driven by pure economics, and a lot of times not even fulfilling its duty to serve society. So how can we actually make that conscious decision as a school of architecture to say that, no, we need to make people who are sensitive to the issues? And one of the points that I keep on harping on is, when people talk about aesthetics, can we teach ethics in it? Instead of business, can we teach empathy? Concern for other human beings. So all those are not subjects in a way, but they're important as individual teachers to actually impart our own value system on them. So and you'd be amazed at how many people hang on to your words. As teachers, Like I get people who I meet like 30 years later, and students, and they say, "You said this," and I don't remember it at all. But for them it is extremely profound. That it's just a small statement that you make of what you believe in yourself. So I think informally as teachers, I think you can definitely make a tremendous change to students' lives. Same time keeping to the curriculum, and the curriculum, you can do that basic thing of keeping the curriculum, but teachers themselves need to be updated on what's happening, and really push those boundaries and challenge students into doing something exciting. And I think travel is I know travel has been restricted in these past years, and for me travel is of a great asset. I mean, when I was in college, there were a gang of 4 of us who used to travel around India, seeing different things whenever you get a break, weekend, or the term end break. And out of the 4, I'm the only architect who's practicing. So one joined NASA. He's now with the University of Texas working on a medical thing. One became a Swamini. She's now part of the Chinmaya mission, heading the educational wing. And the other is an artist based in Japan. And all 3 of them say that the architectural course was amazing for them. They're in completely different lines. So you have to take advantage of the fact that the architectural course is so broad-based and so exciting that to give you all that you need to be a good citizen, that you can tap it. But just a little extra freedom to let them be themselves, let them find their own sort of areas of interest is important as well.
Thank you so much. I think it was really good, and so the most important thing which you focused on was to have a real connect with the real time issues. Second is an idea of learning from peers, and traveling becomes the most important thing. And architecture curriculum being so wide that we may choose different directions, and to allow students to move ahead with what they are inclined in, rather than posing on things on them that this is what you have to do. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hope to meet you soon,
sure.
sometime in Rajkot.
Hopefully the pandemic's getting over soon, so let's see.
Yes, we keep our fingers crossed. Sure. We can meet soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was such a pleasure to meet you. Now we'll take a break for lunch, and then we'll get back at 2:30 for our annual forum.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for coming and presenting a very nice, and it was a good dialogue. Thank you very much.
All the best for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
So I'll request everyone to join back at 2:30 for our annual forum.